I'll start off, Dr. Galland, your talk about that dog dust study reminded me of a joke that I heard years ago at a medical conference. So the story goes that somebody asked this world-famous pulmonologist if he thought asthma was genetic disease. The guy strokes his beard and he says, well, yes, of course it is. It's linked to the same gene that makes people love cats. So, so from the micro to the macro, let me preface this by saying I'm a word guy. You know, I'm a journalist. I'm coming up on 30 years of medical journalism, and suddenly I find myself doing market research and delving deeply into statistics, and it's kind of a new territory for me. I got into it because really, like James was saying, there's a sense that there's a movement happening and that there's something really going on out there. But nobody was really quantifying it. And people were asking me and us as holistic primary care all sorts of questions that I had no idea about. So about 5 years ago, we started actually surveying the community and trying to get a lay of the land sense of what are physicians and other healthcare practitioners doing out there in their practices. How deeply engaged with natural medicine are they? And I think the story is a very promising one. So yeah, numbers tell stories, and the story I want to tell tonight is about clinical convergence. You could say that there's a handful of principles of holistic or functional medicine. Dr. Gallen certainly hit on a bunch of them, that inflammation is a major driver of all sorts of diseases, whether they show up in the cardiovascular system, digestive system, nervous system, wherever it is, kidneys. It's a lot to do with inflammation. The fact that stress, psychosocial stress, is a major factor in illness. You could boil it down to about 6 or 8 principles that account for 80 to 90% of what walks into your clinical practices day to day. And what's interesting, and the point of this clinical convergence idea, is that no matter where people start as practitioners, whether they start out as MDs or chiropractors or nurses or health coaches, once they get out of those silos and start practicing functional medicine or holistic medicine, the practices and the toolkit start to look very similar. And I think the numbers I'm going to show you from our survey this year bear that out. So just for those of you who don't know me or the publication, this is Holistic Primary Care. There's copies on your seats. If you want more information about that, speak to me afterwards. James mentioned we do this Heal by Practice conference that's coming up in October. So if you want a good excuse to come out to Southern California, that's that. Okay, so the survey. So it was a 36-question survey, and if any of you did answer it online, thank you very much for taking the time to do that. We got responses from 652 clinicians. Whoops, sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button here. It was mailed out to about 18,000 via email, classic SurveyMonkey kind of deal. 650 plus respondents, nice number set to work with. A little over half of them were what I would call conventionally trained, so either MDs or DOs or nurses by training. And the rest were chiropractors, naturopaths, and a smattering of other sorts of healthcare professionals. And when we asked what sort of type of practice setting are you in, just to give you a sense of what it looks like out there. I don't know why that's advancing. I'm not touching anything. So about 2/3, say, are in small group practices or solo practices. And so probably a lot like you guys, working in small systems. Some of them are in larger systems, but as you'll see, holistic or functional practice is a bit restricted when you're in a large system. So we asked them what term best describes their mode of practice. A lot of people identifying as, why does that keep doing that? Okay, a lot of people identify as mixed or integrative, which means they're sort of half in the box, half out of the box. They're taking some steps out of a conventional insurance-based model. 16% identify as functional medicine, and then 22% are identifying as holistic. Not too many these days, at least in our cohort, are identifying as allopathic or conventional. What are they doing in their practices? Lots of nutrition counseling. 85% say they're doing nutrition counseling. 76% say they're doing stress management. 53%, well over half, are doing botanicals. So again, very encouraging general signs of the shift, at least among the cohort that looks at holistic primary care. Holistic modalities. Here's where the convergence starts to come in. Not a whole lot of difference between the people who started life as MDs or DOs and the people who started life as chiros, naturopaths, etc., in terms of what they're actually doing in their practices. The MDs say, they're slightly more likely to be doing nutrition counseling. Non-MDs slightly more likely to be doing homeopathy. as part of their practices. That's not too surprising. But overall, there was very similar patterns in terms of what they're incorporating in their practices. Attitudinal questions here. I believe dietary changes and nutritional interventions are a fundamental part of the care of patients with chronic disease. 91% agree with that statement. So again, nutrition-based medicine becoming a part of clinical practice across the board. Very few people disagreeing with that. I believe supplements and natural products have a role in the treatment of common chronic diseases. A lot of people are agreeing with that. So supplements really are becoming a major part of the toolkit for a lot of practitioners. This is just a question about concerns about quality and safety. So there are some concerns about what's out there in the supplement market. Very understandable. Now, a little over half the practices are currently dispensing in the office. And that's been going up steadily over the years. When we first started looking at it, it was down around 29%. Now it's up to 50%. What are they using supplements for? These are among the people who dispense. The biggie was chronic inflammation. Not surprising given the core principles of functional medicine. That was true whether they were MDs or DOs or anybody else. People use them for inflammation, immune system support, arthritis and joint kind of stuff. Quite a bit of people using them for, what does that say? Sleep. Yeah, sleep and osteoporosis. And gut health was a biggie. And so those are the big five right there. And again, not a whole lot of difference between MDs and DOs, conventionally trained people, and non-MDs and DOs in terms of how they're using things. There are a few differences. MDs are more likely to be using them for cancer prevention than the non-MDs, a little bit more for arthritis. But overall, the patterns are very, very similar in terms of how they're dispensing, what they're dispensing for. Now, we looked at the non-dispensers and we asked, okay, if you're not dispensing, why aren't you dispensing? The big roadblocks are this. The employer, the administrators don't let them. So when people are in large group practices that are owned by hospitals, there may be a lot of restrictions on what they can do. So the spirit may be willing, but the administration is weak or something like that. Logistical obstacles, that's a bit of a concern for some people. Medical legal really wasn't as much of a concern as it used to be. I think there's a growing acceptance that it's okay for physicians to be using supplements in practice. There were a few differences between MDs and DOs and non-MDs and DOs as far as what was in the way. Administrative obstacles was a much bigger factor for MDs. Medical legal fears was also quite more prevalent among the MDs than the non-MDs. And non-MDs were actually, it was interesting, they were more likely to cite lack of knowledge, just not really knowing how to use the supplements. But again, the numbers were small there, so I'm not too concerned about this. Now, how many of you are following this whole big flap with the New York Attorney General going after herbal supplements? Show of hands here. Anybody concerned about it? If you're not watching that story and the related stories of increasing calls for supplement regulations, you really need to be, because this is a very significant issue in our field. We fielded this survey in February and March, and so it was right after all the New York AG stuff started to happen. I didn't want to hit that question head on and say, how do you feel about the New York Attorney General or whatever. So we kind of did it a roundabout way. We said, over the last year, what net effect has the media coverage and the scientific research on supplements had on your practice patterns? So we're trying to kind of tease that out, like how's the confidence level? And surprisingly, 50% say they're more confident than they were a year ago. Only 6% say they're less confident. And that was true across the MD and the non-MD spectrum. So the point here is that when practitioners are using supplements in their practice, using nutrition-based therapies in their practice, and they're seeing results, they're seeing what actually happens with the patients, all this stuff about regulatory concerns, all the negative media that's been coming out about supplements doesn't seem to shake that concern. Now, we did ask another question about how do practitioners feel about the current regulatory structure, and do they feel that current regulations are able to really ensure the safety of products across the board? And there are some concerns, particularly in the retail space. So it's not like everybody's just sort of blindly bowing at the altar of supplements, but I think the point here is that when you see things work in your practice, you're going to stick with the tools that seem to be working for you. And so I thought all that in general is very, very encouraging in terms of where the community is headed, what's going on out there in clinical practice. And that's about what we've got. If you want to come out to California, hang out with us, see how I practice in October. It's a great meeting. And we've got a 6-part course on business basics for better practice coming up online. So you'll be getting emails about that kind of stuff. And that's what I've got. Any questions?
Questions here in the room for Eric? We got one here at the back.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, when it comes to, since our focus is community here, when it comes to these actions, like the Attorney General's action against herbal supplements, it's just a kind of a sign where things are at the governmental level. And as history, I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, so the history of colonialism, we've known how it destroys a lot of traditional medicine that truly serves people. So I just feel like sometimes things like this that happens at the Attorney General level is a form of it. So as community, what is being done to address such actions? Because if we as practitioners don't come together as community and unite, things like this can escalate and grow bigger, So what is the collective voice that's happening?
Thank you for that question and comment. That is really right on target. And yeah, come on, round of applause for that. And let's turn that round of applause into action, because right now I don't see a whole lot. I mean, I think part of the challenge is that you guys as clinicians are faced with so much day to day, just in terms of dealing with patients and dealing with regulatory issues of your own. But I think the clinical voice really needs to be part of this discussion about regulations of supplements, and I don't see it happening nearly enough. I mean, the industry has kind of rallied up the wagons to try and make a case that that the Attorney General's actions were way out of line. But I haven't heard too many physicians speaking up. There's certainly been some very high-profile negative comments from clinicians in the mainstream media about how dangerous supplements are and how terribly they're regulated and how they're not regulated and how everything needs to change because there's scammy stuff going on. But I think you guys as functional medicine practitioners, holistic practitioners, really need to stand up to this because it's going to get hairy. That's my prediction anyway.
I just want to make a quick comment about that. So Dr. Hoffman's sitting in the room. I suggest that you check out his podcast. He talks a lot about that particular, he takes our voice and puts it. There's also a group called ANH, Alliance for Natural. Hold on.
Yeah, there's a group called the ANH, Alliance for Natural Health, anh-usa.org, which is an organization that's Washington-based. They have lobbyists in place. They meet with legislators. They sort of track these issues. There are multiple threats every year, both locally and also nationally, to continually, and they try to push back on this. And it's a coalition of laypersons and professionals and industry people who are trying to create a response. So that's one organization that I think it's worthwhile to subscribe to their newsletter, follow what they're doing, and join anh-usa.org.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, they have petitions that go out all the time. If you're on their email list, they send you, here's the petition, and then you sign up, and it automatically sends it to your particular senator in your area. They have it all automated. I really think it's a great organization. There's some really smart people who work there. It costs like $1 a month to be a part of it, and I think it's very, very valuable. So let's have a round of applause for Eric Goldman.